we have special guest Rick Heinz, author of The Seventh Age, gamer, writer, blogger, and speaker on how to not suck at storytelling. Rick, how are you, sir?
I am okay in this year of 2020 craziness. I mean, what? Murder hornets, COVID, civil unrest, everything under the sun, right? Like we were just talking about. We need to have Area 51 reboot because aliens are about to be a thing, right?
Yeah, and while we're at it, we'll make we'll finish the trilogy of Independence Day because that's right around the corner anyway.
Oh, well, we don't need any more of those movies. That's okay.
One baby steps. Is that what you're telling me, Rick?
Right. One at a time. Okay. Murder hornets that rip the heads off bees is enough.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Like we weren't killing our bee population enough ourselves, but.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you because I love interviewing bands, but I love interviewing people outside of the music industry that have a lot to do with the music industry, and you have a lot to do with the music industry right now because you're creating a concept album and turning it into a tabletop RPG, and that's amazing. Right. We're talking about DiAmorte's Red Opera, metal opera, of course.
So what happened with that was Paul Allender from Cradle of Filth and Drake Mephisto from DiAmorte were in my kitchen some time ago, maybe about a year and a half ago.
That's exciting.
And we were hanging out, and I was trying to understand Paul through his British accent, and they were talking about how do we sort of get out there to fans to showcase the awesome Red Opera that they had built, and I offhandedly made a comment that they should turn this into a Dungeons and Dragons D&D module, right? A full campaign. Mm-hmm. And the room kind of got quiet for a second, and they looked at me and go, "Oh, it sounds like a great idea.
When can you have it done?
Yeah, let's go after it." So I had spent about a year and a half writing, and I took everything that they had done, and I made this whole Warlock-inspired adventure. And then I brought in some other writers like Patrick Edwards and Joseph Afsahani to help flesh this world out. And what originally was supposed to be just this little 10-act paperback adventure module is spawned into this full hardcover epic saga with a complete setting, locations, heavily leaning on inspiration from Diablo and various aspects of metal and gaming history. So we centered everything around warlocks, right? Which if you're familiar with D&D at all, and if you're not, they're sort of the class that cuts deals with devils. Yeah. And we know that that's a facet of Dungeons and Dragons that hasn't really been played up very much, but it's very heavily played up in a lot of music and in a lot of aspects of society culture. So we wrote this whole saga where the players get to actually choose the events and rewrite DiAmorte's Red Opera when they get towards the end of it. So the players actually have the choice.
So it's not just a tabletop, it's almost like a choose your own adventure book, which were some of my favorites as a child.
Well, all tabletop gaming really should be. I mean, the panel that I run is, how to not suck at storytelling, which basically covers, how to be a proactive storyteller for your players in your group so they have player agency. And when I started writing, I really was like, well, they have a tale. The Red Opera ends in a very specific way. Mm-hmm. We can't quite have that. The players have to dictate the fate of the Shadelands. And so that was something that we really tried to encapsulate with the module and the campaign to actually make it so that no matter where you're at, whether you're level 1 characters or level 20 characters, you can determine the final outcome of the entire event and have your own campaign with that.
That's wonderful. Now, I have a question. This obviously isn't your first endeavor at writing modules or even full campaigns for an RPG of this size. What were some of the complications that you did come across when it came to the Red Opera? I'm assuming that you had some great insight. The Red Opera as an album, as what it is, an extreme metal opera, is fantastic. The story behind it, the lore, which there's so much lore, and you have to have that when you're talking D&D modules or tabletop gaming modules. What were some of the things that kind of set you back with the Red Opera story and trying to keep it open enough that players get to choose how the events take place?
Right. So the hardest thing was when you have music and you have an album, you have some song lyrics and things like this. You're really just telling 5-6 minute segments of a tale. And if you have a stage production and a show, a concert's an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe not with a encore. That's not enough to fill any semblance of an actual written story. There's no plot beats. There's plot beats, but there's not really the same kind of 5-act structure that you're used to in like any narrative, design. So a lot of it was taking the skeletons and just zoning out and listening to the music. And then I actually had to fill in all of the lore gaps to tie everything together, right? So the biggest hurdle was, sort of translating from music to written text to go from the song lyrics, which probably summed up as maybe around 3,000 words at most, to a 75,000, 85,000 word campaign. That was the hurdle, and we had to rewrite some of the things. In the original, we actually ended up rewriting almost the entire lore with DiAmorte's blessing. They signed off on officially being like, this new version of the Red Opera is fantastic. So one of the major changes was this character called Fate that they had in the Red Opera, and she originally was somebody who was there to look out for humanity and be a good guy. And when I rewrote it, we had decided to make her somebody very close to the players, and so every storyteller can envision their version of that character, so that when the players had to make critical choices later on in the game, that's the avenue that we did it, which we thought was kind of cool because, well, it's Fate. That's her name.
Yeah.
But so that was one of the bigger hurdles. The other big hurdle was turning this into a beautiful book. And this is where Apotheosis Studios and Jameson Stone and David Granjo, who are some of the artists, and Carlos Ortiz, who are working on this, they took all of this written text and they then had the hard time of taking all the words and then drawing these beautiful landscapes and wonderful pictures to visually bring the album and the book to life.
So as you're narrating, let's say you're the GM of the game, as you're narrating, people can also look at the illustrations, and it'll play well with the words, and not just do you have the illustration, but you're building a painting in your mind as well.
Oh, entirely. And the intent is that we'll be able to actually have the instrumental music and be able to run the campaign to the Red Opera music without the lyrics, because it's kind of hard to run a campaign when there's people singing. But to have some of the music and the songs while you're running it, and then you have the art. So to tie music into actual tabletop gaming with a visual medium, that was sort of the hurdle in front of us. Luckily, it was fun. It was a hell of a lot of fun to create this because it's epic.
Yeah, well, the Red Opera, just the album itself is, like I said, there's so much lore. You can spin the album and go, yeah, I really like this. But when you start to learn more about DiAmorte and the Red Opera as a whole, there's so much, and actually it's very intriguing.
No,
please go ahead.
Oh yeah, the basic story is that the Shadelands is a place where the veil between the worlds runs thin. So, up in the Shadelands, warlocks or people who want to make a deal with, a satyr or a devil or any other kind of creature that's not quite a god can make a pilgrimage to the Shadelands. And there, into this place where the veil between worlds runs thin, the players go and they find out that the accursed king, this noble man, had made a deal with every creature in the lands. Unfortunately, one too many packs means that he might be going a little bit insane, and the Shadelands is at a risk of tearing itself apart. So the players then get involved with, how did this happen? How do we fix it? What do we do? Do we really want this to happen? And so obviously there's betrayal, there's love, there's all the other fun segments, and drinking in a bar with your familiars at a familiar tavern. So you can't be afraid to have some humor in this stuff either.
No, it's got to be laced with satire somewhere.
Right.
Every metalhead that I know is a very satirical person.
Right. Well, I mean, that's why we did this, is because since I was a kid in the 80s, I'm a proud member of the Oregon Trail generation, and so I grew up when Satanic Panic and Patricia Pulling's bad bothered about Dungeons and Dragons was a real thing. And I remember being in Calumet City when my mom was listening to Metallica, and a police officer asked me, if I had known anything about the devil, or if things
good
were,
Lord.
right. But they had commercials out there and pamphlets that you would get that saying, Dungeons and Dragons is Satan's game. I mean, I think everybody knows Dr. Demento in the, classic magic missile skit, Into the Darkness, if you're a gamer. And that aspect of how much Satanic Panic and all of these, organizations back in the 70s and the 80s hated both metal. I mean, Ozzy Osbourne got pulled into a Geraldo Rivera interview for where he was like, basically being heralded as the Antichrist, and he didn't know what the heck was going on. He was very confused in that interview because he didn't know. And so there was a lot of culture around saying that if you listen to metal, you're going to go to the devil. If you listen to, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to hell. This was a legitimate fear that people had, and it even got to the point where like the police officers were involved. They started blaming all of these things on Gygax's game. And of course, when you're a kid and you're growing up listening to this music and you're around, all of this is it's not a turnoff. It's basically an advertisement for, hey, check this out.
It's the big red button. It's
right.
Don't push.
And so, I found myself my, first copy of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and, walked around, and I had nobody to play with, like you do when you're a kid. And so you just read the book and you get lost in your fantasy. And of course, I was a big reader, so I read just tons of fantasy novels and, built entire stories up in my head, and longed for the day where I would end up having a group to play with. Luckily, that happened, and I haven't stopped being a storyteller since. 18 years now, actually. I rarely get to be the player. It's kind of one of my curses.
Yeah.
But, but that's kind of why we went with the Warlocks, because I'm like, okay, there's no way we're going to do a campaign that is based off of a metal album and not bring in some aspect of like dealing with, the hidden ones, the devils, the fae, the myths, the legends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are infused into so many different songs and musics that are out there.
Awesome. Now another question. This I'm very curious about this. There's so many different RPGs out there. Is there a particular system that you went with for character building and for a dice rolling, if you will?
For the Red Opera, yeah, we use 5th edition, which is sort of Wizards of the Coast's open gaming license. They released it so that as long as you're not using, specific named content like Ravenloft or Faerun, as long as you created your own content, you could use their dice engine and some of their monsters, which, you went through multiple editions of the Dungeons and Dragons, and we went with 5th edition because it's easily accessible. A lot of people can play it. It is really easy to storytell with, and you can house rule whatever you want whenever you need it. So that makes flow of play very easy around the table. Because the idea is if you're going to be hanging out with your friends, playing, say the Red Opera for a year of content, every Friday night you get together, you have food, you have drinks, and you go on an epic quest. You want something that the rules allow you to feel a sense of progression, but the game isn't about the rules, the game is about the story.
Yeah. And you're just not making it up as you go along so much that, oh, well, that dice roll doesn't matter. There's still organization. There are some rules, but you can bend and play with them as the GM, as the game master. Right. So, and keep it very entertaining. That's I never really got into Dungeons and Dragons. I was introduced to Palladium Gaming, Rifts and Palladium, which was their version of
totally.
D&D.
I had I grew up actually my first game system was Wraith the Oblivion by White Wolf. And so I was very big in the 90s into the, like wearing a trench coat, going to vampire LARPs, doing, all of the, various aspects of gaming culture with different game systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I played everything from Deadlands, where you were sitting around the table having a bunch of cards and you're playing chips to, stop yourself from dying. I played Rifts. We did a great BattleTech game once where we actually had the BattleTech miniatures lined up for the full map combat with all the, like BattleTech was a game where you had the minis on the map and you would play like a tactical game, but they released a role-playing game supplement where you could actually role-play the pilots. So what we would do is we would role-play the pilots and have a normal tabletop session. And then when it was ready for combat, we went and played the big tactical mini game. I have played so many game systems and storytelled for so many different types of them that I've picked and learned a lot of what each system does well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we did the Red Opera, yes, I had the choice to maybe go use Powered by the Apocalypse engine, which is sort of like a dedicated Apocalypse game, but it's very, very, very rules light, or finding another open source engine, or maybe even trying to go with like a World of Darkness system. But Wizards made it very, very easy to have an open gaming license, and the sense of progression for what they do, and the fact that they have a class like the Warlocks featured, but very rarely explored. I still haven't found, and please, if anybody who ever hears this video or this radio finds a part of the world or a official segment of Faerun or Forgotten Realms where the Warlocks rule, let me know, because Warlocks are sort of a class that just there's great cities ruled by wizards. Paladins have their entire temples. Clerics, who are the priests, they get to do their thing. But Warlocks kind of, they were the outsiders. They never really got any big material to them, which is funny because I run a program where I storytell for kids, and every kid wants to play a Warlock, which says something about the nature of kids these days.
It is a different time. I mean,
Right.
it's the coolest name out there, the Warlock, and yeah, it even in video gaming RPGs and what have you, the Warlock is never, you want to be the barbarian or you want to be the archer, you want to have that specific skill set, and
No, I mean,
the Warlocks just never appeal.
I joke in my novel, at the back of my novel, I was like, you know what? I spent countless hours playing Diablo, Diablo 2, and Diablo 3. I always played the freaking Necromancer or, the Sorcerer. I never played the Barbarian. I know the Amazon was broken, but, it didn't matter.
That's great. So, I kind of want to bridge a gap here because I'm probably about your age as well. And there was a time where being a metalhead and being a gaming geek, and I don't use that term. I use that term as an endearing term.
We wear it with pride now.
Yeah, we do. As a matter of fact, if you're not a geek, you're not getting all the girls, but there was a time, like in the late 80s, 90s, and even into the early 2000s, where you had to choose if you were a metalhead or if you were a geek, kind of thing. You couldn't be both, almost, and it's very different now. Like any metalhead that out there probably does some of the geekiest shit that you've ever heard in your life.
Well, I mean, even if they weren't directly involved in gaming, even in the 90s, like Renaissance fairs were still a thing. I mean, folk metal, I definitely think bridged a lot of gaps between sort of the gaming culture and the metal culture. And when Death Clock came out and they started adding like awesome parodies to this and bringing like a humorous aspect to metal, that definitely opened up some more bridging of the gaps, right?
Yeah, like the Demu burger.
Yeah, right, exactly. The coffee that melts your face. I mean, I grew up on like Fear Factory and right, like they were my favorite band. And one of the things that happened to me is by day I'm an electrician, and I had been working in Chicago for some time. And occasionally I would always, ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to go see a Fear Factory show. And at times I would do, concert lighting at night. I would, hang out and work at doing the lighting board or setting something up. And at the Bottom Lounge in Chicago, every time I wanted to go see Fear Factory, some life tragedy happened. It just completely sidetracked me. So it took me years to finally be able to see them live. And when I was standing outside having a smoke, because back then I used to smoke still, and I was, shooting the shit with this guy, and we were just talking about Diablo, and that's it. We were just bullshitting about Diablo, how to get into the certain levels, how do you open secret portals, what do your characters play. And then eventually he's like, hey, I got my laptop over here. Can you show me the recipe? And he invites me over, and I didn't realize it, but it was Tony Campos, who's their bassist.
Of course.
And I was like, and that was like when the illusion had popped, right? Like in my head, that I was like, no, wait a minute. Even though that they didn't start off in the late 80s, and early 90s as being, geeks who are role-playing dice in the basement, to because everybody had probably at some point started to really like Lord of the Rings, fantasy, those merged. But even I think with video games, I think video games like Doom, Diablo, there was a lot of darker video games that even if you were just listening to metal, playing video games, you were immersed in a gaming and a geek culture. Tabletop gaming kind of disappeared for a while. I think
Absolutely, it fell off the face of the earth.
Yeah, well, I mean, World of Warcraft and the rise of MMOs kind of altered the landscape for a little while, right? Everybody could just log in, go play with their guild, do their stuff, and whether you're playing City of Heroes, Secret Wars, anything. But thanks to a show like Critical Role and new products being brought out, tabletop gaming kind of re-entered popularity.
Well, so, the new medias that are out there too, such as Zoom and Skype and things of that nature, plus all the podcasts and blogs that are coming out. Yeah, it definitely sparked a new interest in it.
I mean, it definitely is easier to play, but I think really it just came down to you could hang out with a handful of your friends, or if you were going to LARPs, you could go hang out with 100 people or 60 people, and you could game, you could play, and it was a relatively cheap hobby, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't something, it's not inaccessible. You didn't need to load thousands of dollars into it unless you were like hardcore into costumes, which I know some of those people.
I used to work at the Renaissance Festival myself for a lot of years, so yeah, Renaissance costumes are fucking expensive.
Yes, they are. I may not be looking at one of my hats right now. But so it was a low cost of entry, right? So you could get together with your friends and you could actually tell a story together, and you could have fun. You could go through, the Temple of Elemental Evil or something, and you didn't have to go spend money to go see a movie, and it also got you away from the computer, because I think after a while there was some element of we can play online with our guilds, but you also do like hanging out with your friends and seeing.
Yeah.
Plus, there's food. Right?
Right.
Any good tabletop game is trademarked by who's bringing the food. I mean, one of the best reasons to be a storyteller is that your players should be bringing the food. And I will tell that, and I will stand by that point. If anybody, if you're running a game out there and your players aren't offering you gifts of food and mead, you can start doing some stuff with the dice behind that corner.
Right. And you know what? I agree with that, because you're the one doing all the work.
Well, actually, funny enough is I keep my players in my game. I usually actually have it be where we all do something. I usually have one player like help write the lore, like not in the story sense, but sort of be a transcriber for the events that have happened. Somebody else might help with character sheets, or somebody else might be the person who knows every single rule in the book, so that we have that guy to do it. And so this way, everybody is involved in some way when you're running the game. Because when somebody's just a player, I often find that at the table, even if they're engaged in the story, when they're not on screen, so to say, it helps that they have something else to fall back on. And that's just like one of the tips that I do when I talk about like how to not suck at storytelling, is generally get your players involved in more ways than just the story.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's awesome. And you mentioned briefly, but I kind of want to expand on it. You also do a seminar, if you will, for younger kids that want to get into storytelling, and at the ripe age when their mind is just a sponge and ready to absorb all this lore. And like you said, you got, one guy that knows all the rules, and somebody who's really good at just amplifying the story that's being told by the GM. What brought you to become kind of a mentor for these children in tabletop gaming?
Well, I wanted to, do the opposite of bothered against Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like I wanted to go against that. No. What really happened is I have a son, right? And okay. my son, whenever we were playing, even at a very young age, he would occasionally pop in and pretend to be a treasure goblin or something like that.
Oh, nice.
And he wanted to know what we were doing. And one of the big problems with the rise of gaming back into the popular medium is that there's a shortage of storytellers. And I had sat at a table at a game store with my friend, and there was this kid at the table, and this kid had to be maybe 11, 12 years old, and he was playing this, ranger who's in the wilderness hunting, and he didn't know how to do the rules. And the storyteller who was running the program, or running this store event, he yelled at the kid, and I was like, what are you, an idiot? How do you not know this, right? And I was like, full stop, not okay, done. Me and my friend got up, we grabbed the kid, we sat down, I instantly pulled out my own books, and I started running the campaign just for the kid. I was like, that's it, done. This isn't happening.
No.
And that had sparked in me is that kids never get a chance to really play because the adults want to do one thing and the kids want to do another. And so we started up a program to teach kids how to be storytellers, and I wrote this thing that I call the Storyteller's Forge. And I'm still working on it to be finally out, but it's a full like 26 act adventure type thing. And every act teaches you how to become a storyteller, how to build an encounter, how to do stuff. And you do it through play, right? You have a village, you have to survive in the wilderness. Then you go and recruit people, start building your village. You got a dragon who's attacking you. And the program at the store has grown to over 150 kids at this point. And I have like 5 or 6 different GMs. And the whole point is that when you get about halfway through the adventure, the kids are the ones who are also taking turns being storytellers. And sometimes we'll have their parents come in and play pirates. And like the kids will run the adventures for their families or their friends. And it's a lot of fun. And they take it really serious. I will say the thing I love storytelling most about kids is if you've ever played and had one of your friends like rage out or get angry at the table, the kids actually don't do that. When something bad happens to them, they are like, they're all into it, right? They're like, you know, they
acting
know,
it out on the ground,
right,
rolling around like, oh, I got stabbed.
you know, like they get invested, and they do, you know, the art that they draw when they come up with their characters, and you know how invested they get with their stories. I mean, you know, one of the at the end of the campaign, their mentor, this brass dragon, had gotten, you know, killed by their arch rival. And when that happened, every kid in the entire store, across all the tables, they just stopped. They put down their cell phones. They were fully invested, and that blue dragon was going down. You know, like they
We're not
were
leaving
dedicated
here until I roll a natural 20.
what happened afterwards, though, was that, you know, some of the kids were really, really sad that the brass dragon died. And like to the point where they were emotionally invested, and we had to have a cool down session afterwards to help, like, you know, show them that, like, okay, no, there's dragon eggs, things go on, there's spells and magic you can do, and that's the next quest. But you know, they get emotionally invested in their characters, and as a means of that, they end up absolutely creating their own content. They draw pictures, they find theme songs, they build their own worlds, and it's really awesome to see. And that's why I started doing this whole thing of, here's how we're going to do a storyteller forge. We're going to teach people how to become storytellers, so then they could go run for their friends, just like I had to learn to do, you know, by myself when, you know, I was 11, 12 years old.
Yeah, and you know what? I grew up an only child, and I was fine with it. I grew up in a very loving family, so there was nothing wrong with that. But you know, at times you're just a kid, and mom's tired of dealing with you. You go play in the backyard. That was my pirate ship. That was my space station, and I don't think that sort of creativity is introduced to kids, you know, toddlers all the way up through teenage years. You know, I now they're handed a phone or an iPad here, play Crush Bubbles or whatever game is popular at the moment, instead of, you know, sitting down and teaching a kid how to make a sword out of a stick, you know, and letting them use their imagination. I think we're calling them, you know, and dumbing them down a little bit with some of our new technology. Don't get me wrong, I have my phone in my hand all the time. I'm in front of my computer, and my PlayStation's right next to me. But, you know,
well, I can say from personal experience, even though these kids will sit on down and they will have played every video game, even games that they shouldn't be playing, but they have sat down, they've played everything, they're on their phones, but when they get to the table, their imagination is still there. It's still active. Right. And their parents love it because obviously their kid is now doing something different. They're writing their own stories, and then they're drawing character art. So it does work. And there's been a lot of sort of research that's going into education and gaming, like, you know, the gamification of education. And so that is a merit that they're using it to help people on the spectrum, to help people get over speech impediments. When you have to role play a character, right? One of my very close friends, he had a speech impediment and he spoke with a stutter, but by going and having to role play in a safe environment and learning how to like act as his character, he actually overcame it.
Interesting. That's really, really, I should probably do that. I'm a goddamn radio DJ and I still stutter all the time. maybe that would be a good thing for me to pick up. No, but I truly think that that's awesome. You know, anything involving the kids. I don't have kids. I've never really wanted kids because I'm one of those overpopulation freaks. But the kids are our future.
We can go back to murder hornets.
Yeah, back to the murder hornets.
Back to the murder hornets.
What I think you're doing with the kids, though, is absolutely amazing, because kids will tell you a story whether you want to hear it or not. And sometimes you look at them like, where did you even get all that from?
Oh, yeah. I don't really have to write much plot. I just sit back and listen to them tell me the story, and then I just put rails on it to make it cohesive.
Nice. Nice. Oh, that's great, man. So, but yeah, you had mentioned that you did some lighting. Now, our good friend Drake, I didn't open up this interview talking about Drake because it would have turned into what a great guy that Drake guy is. And we would have spent 30 minutes talking about him because he is. He's a wonderful person and he does so much for the music community and all that.
Yeah, but I know a secret about Drake.
Do you?
Yes, I know his true name.
Oh, yeah. Don't make me mute your mic, man.
Oh, no. I will never speak it. That is the power that I hold over him. I have seen his driver's license.
That's funny because there's a gentleman out here. He every once in a while he'll promote a good show, like he'll bring Putrid Pile to town or something like that. But on Facebook, he goes by Chefry Dahmer because he's a chef.
Oh, I love it, actually. That's all right.
For years, I was just calling him Chefry. I thought his name was fucking Jeff. Somebody comes by and they're like, "Hey, Nick." I'm like, "You have a real fucking name?"
Yeah.
Drake is definitely one of those guys.
Yes, he is.
You have a real name?
Right.
I'm not calling you that bullshit.
Exactly. Right. I'm just like, I know this secret. That's it. It stays with me.
Yeah. Well, he told me a little secret. Now, you had mentioned that you did some lighting here and there, but he actually told me that you did some lighting for some pretty big acts. Do you care to kind of relive some of those memories of doing some shows and some of the bands that you've hung out with and done lighting for?
Well, see, the Allstate Arena, I got a chance to work at and help with, and one of the bands that I'd gotten to see was Metallica, right? Mm-hmm. And this was when they just came back on. Yeah, we never heard of them. They never came back on tour, and they have their own people, right? We don't have to do shit. We're just, I'm just the local, stage guy that works for the arena and whatnot, and just being around that crew was immersive and impressive. And that's actually how I've become a fan of so many bands. Like I actually became a fan of Godsmack after seeing their drummers do their set on stage, and I was like, holy hell. Like just seeing live performances and the way that the musicians go up there, I have respect for anybody who gets up on stage at this point.
Yeah. And
like that's just something I learned really early on. Even if I wasn't a big fan of country music or anything like that, I still absolutely loved doing their shows and just have total respect for anybody who gets on stage, because that takes a lot, right? And it's a lot of skill and talent. But there's so much production and so many people that help bring the events to life. So working tech crew has always been a fun sense of camaraderie with there's so many people, so many friends that I've made. And, it's like when you make a book or when you do anything, and, yes, that the big headliner is, Metallica. That, Fear Factory is going to go live, or, I had done a few shows at the Aragon, and one of them was for White Zombie. Back when they were around. And I will tell you this straight forth. I was a kid. My mom happened to work security, and she just happened to know some of the security guards, and they let me come back and help with the lighting board and just sit back there. And I got to sit there with the lighting guy who was told to watch out if I was flirting with any girls. And so, as I would try to do, because when you have a cool guest pass, you might be like, "Hi, you're cute. Let's talk." Right.
Yeah.
And
you come here often.
Right. And he would grab me and pull me back behind the thing. But, I had learned that there's so many people that bring an event to life. And one of I still do it to this day. If I go see any production, whether even if it's Undertale live at the Chicago Symphony, the first thing I do is my eyes instantly wander around to the rest of the crew. What's the light set up, who's there, who's helped bringing the production to life, because there's so many parts and wheels. And I think that a lot of times when people...
Oh, I think I lost him there. Are you still with me, sir?
Oh, yeah, I'm still...
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, we just switched to video somehow.
I don't know how.
Me either. We're gonna leave it alone.
Yep. But anyway, I think when people cast a quick judgment about a band or a performance, they forget that there's a lot of people and a lot of effort that goes into it from every stage. And sometimes you just have to respect the joy of production, right? To see the awesome stage show or just to like check out what's really happening, or even, how are they mixing those light colors? Like there's some really neat science behind all that.
It really is. I had the pleasure of getting to play around with the light board here at one of the local venues. My buddy was doing sound. He's like, "Have a seat. Here, play with those. Just click on some of the stuff." I was like, "Really?
One of my,
I will fuck everything up."
Yeah, well, I mean, one of my favorite ones was I was working this convention. It was actually an anime convention. It was ASIN out here in Chicago, and I was working the show, and they had a bunch of Japanese metal bands and like pop bands like performing on stage, and I don't speak Japanese, so I didn't quite understand sometimes their entire what their producers or what their lighting cues were supposed to be. So most of it was like I was like, okay, well, I don't really know what's here. I'm just gonna press buttons and like hope that this works, right? And it turned out great. The band loved it, and so did like the fans. And they're like, oh, that was so much better than what we had. They were all super thankful that I had like swapped some color palettes around and like actually made the stage show a little bit more dynamic, and that was a lot of fun. But it was still crazy because I didn't actually understand what was really being said back and forth.
Right. That was my experience at the board too. Like, I don't know. I'm just hitting the swatches. I don't even know what they mean.
But yeah, so I mean, and that was just a side gig for me. Really, I'd spent most of my time as an electrician, which is how I got involved in, sort of the conspiracy novels and the various like symbology, the occult stuff. I mean, I write this whole series about what happens today if magic returns to the world. And it was all based off of an experience that I had when I was demolishing the building next to the Chicago Board of Trade. And it's this big financial building with tons of, CEOs and VPs and very, very affluent in money. And we were demolishing up like these beautiful Irish castle like walls, these woodwork things in these offices, and they were just going to turn it into a stark office building. And I had removed a few panels, and on one of the walls in the vice president's office, there was this alchemy guild symbol. Like, I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was this crazy symbol baked into the concrete wall. Like, it was carved into the original brick. And the vice president had put a plaque underneath it that said, "A man's only worth is how much wealth it generates," which is creepy.
Wow.
That is a terrible statement. And my boss, my foreman, Don, he's an old school hippie. He was like, "That's messed up, man." And he's like looking around, and he's like, "This is like a church to money." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "What is that symbol?" Well, I took a photo of it, and I went and I researched it, and I found out it was the official Alchemy Guild symbol from like 1863. And the slogan that they had on there really had meant to find gold in your soul. Well, at some point in history, that fragment, that phrase, got changed and warped by the owners of this building, and they turned it into, it's all about making money, not finding wealth within. And so I came up with the whole idea right then and there, like, what if in our world all these secret societies that we've ever heard of actually exist, and they've been hoarding magic from the rest of us? And so what happens when a group of anarchists decide to level the playing field and give that shit to everybody in the world?
Right.
And so that's how I actually started writing, and that was the first book that I had ever done. I've been off the rails since then. I just keep writing.
That's great. Now, your first novel was The Seventh Age, correct?
Yeah, The Seventh Age, Dawn, actually.
Okay. Hey, where can we find your literature and some of your novels and your work? Because I'm sure it's spread across between tabletop gaming and being just a novelist as well.
So for urban fantasy fiction, you can find The Seventh Age Dawn at Barnes & Noble. You can find it at Amazon. I had won a contest with The Nerdist, which is like a media conglomerate site about culture. They had a contest for, the top 5 science fiction and fantasy novels. And I entered my manuscript. I got lucky. I won. And they gave me a full publishing deal. Like, there's an audiobook narrated by James Patrick Cronin. He's real hilarious. So that's how I got my start with that. So, but you can find it anywhere. You can find it on Amazon, bookstores, anything of the sort. You might have to ask them, because I'm probably not on the shelf anymore. But it's there. And then for the Red Opera, you can just simply go to theredopera.com, and it'll take you right to the Kickstarter page, because we have to go to Kickstarter in order to raise enough money for printing costs. And
well, because you guys have made this such a big deal at this point, what started out as a joke between some legends in a kitchen turned into, what was it, 75,000 words? Or
at least I think it's actually a little bit more than that now. But
well, what's great is you did bring up the Kickstarter. I'm looking at the page right now. It hasn't started yet, but you can go to, what is it here, kickstarter.com/projects/Stone Jameson/
Oh, no. You can just go to theredopera.com.
DiAmorte.com, yes.
Oh, no, not even that. Just type in theredopera.com and it takes you right to the Kickstarter page.
Okay. You know what? I'll let you tell us, because I got this all wrong.
Yeah, you can. We made it simple. I know you have the like the pre-link. Yeah, you can just type theredopera.com and you go there and you'll see this thing called The Red Opera: Last Days of the Warlock, and from there you can just follow it. The project's going to go live in September, but following it is actually super helpful to us, because then we can gauge sort of what stretch goals we can aim for, or what other stuff we can bring to it before it goes to launch.
Yeah, and that's totally awesome, man. And you know what, back to glorifying Mr. Drake Mephisto there, the dude deserves it, and I know that you and Apotheosis Studios have put so much work into this, but I mean, Drake does so much. Like, he's helped me out with my radio show countless times with graphics, and he's the one that got us together for this interview. So he had a moment of brilliance when he said that he wanted me to just be cut loose to write the lore, because he knew I saw his vision of like what it could be. And so he was like, he's like, this was my child, like I came up with this first idea, but he's like, it's now yours when it comes to the lore. Like, go. And he just let me do it. And then I showed it to him at the end, and he was like practically in tears. He was like, this is awesome, this is perfect. He's like, you get it. And I'm like, yeah, dude, it's metal and epic and awesome. Yeah, exactly. Which is a good way to describe Drake as a person as well. He's just metal, epic, and awesome.
Yep.
But yeah, speaking of that, when the Kickstarter goes off, I would love to have you back on the show. We're going to plan for another interview here in the future, so we can get a little more in depth about the Red Opera. And
oh yeah, because by then I'll be able to tell you about, like, here's the cool things you can get.
Yes. And I'm sure, like you said, you can play the Red Opera as a soundtrack, and I know that Drake's going to be putting a lot of that together, but I'm sure there'll be some new music wrapped around it as well. There's going to be a lot to talk about, so I'll definitely have you back on, and we'll have Drake on to talk more about it too.
Absolutely. The band DiAmorte and the people like Colin Parks and James Horton and Paul Allender that Drake's working with now, they're making some new music that's going in time with this, and it's freaking awesome. I was just blown away, because like, while we're doing our thing with the written end, the DiAmorte hasn't stopped. They're going full tilt with, okay, we're going down this line and we're going to keep making this better and better.
Yeah, and for those of you listening that aren't familiar with DiAmorte, like he said, Paul Allender, from Ex Cradle of Filth, current White Empress, and I know he has a new project that he's starting up as well. There was Mike LaPon in there, like you said, James Norton, which very, very geek. Little side tip there, James also did some of the choir and some of the singing for the new Doom soundtrack for the new video game.
Yep.
Along with a bunch of other metal vocalists.
Which goes back to that earlier point that we had when we were talking about it, gaming and metal. James, while he never really played much D&D, said he obviously played Doom.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But I'm looking forward to getting more in depth here in the future after that Kickstarter goes off. And like you said, go to theredopera.com. You can learn more about it. You can follow, which helps drastically pump up the Kickstarter. And get in there. I'm sure that there's going to be some packages depending on what you can donate to the Kickstarter, maybe your name in the credits and all that.
Yeah,
we'll get into that.
We have all that stuff planned, and but really, it absolutely helps independent content creators.
Yeah,
that's why we choose Kickstarter.
Wonderful. Well, hey Rick, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I really, really appreciate you being on the show, man. You're a great interview, a wonderful person to talk to, and I love everything that you're doing, especially with the kids and teaching the kids how to storytell, and even us adults, because I'm sure as an adult you can get in on one of those classes. But
oh no, the campaign, I run it for my friends just as much as I run it for kids.
That's super awesome, man. And you're right, because I remember my dad playing D&D, and I wanted to get involved, and they're like, no, it's an adult game, and it's not. So I think it's wonderful what you're doing. One more time, go ahead and plug where we can find you, Amazon and all
So
that
you
good
can
stuff.
find the Seventh Age if you're into urban fantasy about the end of the world, which is more timely relevant now than probably anything else. I didn't know I was storing that, but you can find that at Barnes & Noble, Amazon. It's the Seventh Age Dawn. You can find me on Twitter or at Geek and Sundry at CrankyBolt. That's my official handle on most mediums. And then the redopera.com is the campaign project for The Last Days of the Warlock.
Wonderful. Author Rick Heinz, thank you very much for being on the show, dude. And I'll be in contact. We'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you very much for having me, man.
Have a great day.